All right, okay, so thank you guys for coming. I know I am now competing against lasers, so I'm going to try to make this very exciting. As you can see, well, for some of the people in the audience, you may not recognize this. This is actually, when you're talking about things being over the top, overkilling something, the first thing that comes to mind, most obviously, is Spinal Tap. If you haven't seen it, awesome movie, but so Overkill, the home edition. This is really just a journey, and it's funny. I was reading my notes, and I said, to build the most complicated home system setup ever done by a sysadmin for professional use. And then I met you yesterday, and I realized I had oversold that. It's not quite as complicated as it can be, but I'm working on it. So I'll come to you and get at least an honorary degree once I'm done. So that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about taking something that we use every day, something that we care about, because it's how we connect out to the rest of the world. It's how we do research. It's how we're all in this. We're all we're here on a weekend at a security conference, to learn more, to be connected to this stuff. So that's where we're starting now. What's funny is when I first started making the notes for this, Khalil posted this tweet. I had all my notes, gathered them all together, and was about to make the slides. And he posted this, and so it just seemed very fitting. It was a happy little coincidence, if you believe in coincidences. And so I'm hoping, despite the amount of coffee that I've had, I end up more on the left side of that as opposed to the right side of that. But if I do start wandering into crazy conspiracy theory territory, just someone kind of cut it off, and we'll be good, and we'll get through this together, and everything will be fine. So with that, let's kind of get started into how this came about. Now, for those of you who remember me from last year, I gave a talk about the bigger of the two small children in the screen. My daughter, and how she was basically teaching me to be a better social engineer or detecting social engineering attacks. So obviously the first thing that we think about is being sysadmins, and especially when you're talking about your home network, is you have family. You have people that are in your house, whether they are friends, family, roommates, whatever. And they're there. And so to give you guys a little background about myself, I was a sysadmin for about 10 years before I truly went over to the dark side and became a programmer and building all the things that make sysadmins angry outside of users. And so I remember in the 10 years of being a sysadmin, I had encountered what I thought was every type of user. So before we get into this network, I'm going to tell you a story about family and how family differs when you're dealing with them and users, and the reason why you want to have a good change window system if you're going to fix something on the network, or in my case, play with DNS, because the first thing to break on any network is DNS, and if something's broken on the network, it's DNS. Even when it's not DNS, you'll find out it's still DNS somehow. It's really the magical protocol. So my daughter is watching her videos like she normally does at night. She's got her iPad, and I'm over there playing around with DNS crypt, because cool technology. And I break it. I tried to add IPv6 resolution without adding IPv6 to my network, without thinking it through, and everything goes down. Within 5 seconds of it going down and me furiously trying to fix it, here comes my daughter, iPad in hand, headphones still on her head, iPad's now in front of my screen. Papa, it's broken. I know I'm trying to fix it, but my videos don't work. I know I'm trying to fix it, but they're not working. This went on nonstop for the 5 minutes it took me to fix it, at which point she didn't say thank you, like every other user. She just wandered back off and continued watching her videos. So I've never had a user that persistent to do their work in my entire career, which is coming up on about 20 years. So family is different than users in that they like you enough that they can ask you a question every 30 seconds until it's fixed. So this switched my time window of when I'd work on this network from middle of the day, at night when I got home and everybody's eating dinner, to between the hours of 4 and 6 in the morning and 9 and 11 at night. Actually, I take that back. 11 and 12 at night. My wife is watching, certain things and watching TV shows, Netflix, whatever. So that's kind of how one of the things you guys got to take into account is that when you go to start to do this, you're going to be changing network a lot. Now, if you have very understanding roommates, family, maybe people that are in this field or that you kind of understand this is how networks are, that's awesome. You're going to have a lot easier time with this. Otherwise, you plan everything in advance and you make changes really fast and you move forward. So, as I told you guys, I'm coming up on about 20 years in the field, so I remember a time when networks were simple. Okay, to be fair, maybe not simple, but there were a lot less moving parts. So, if you will, I want to take you guys back in time to when, my first real network, and this is not talking about, when I had that single computer connected to a modem, because I told my parents I needed it to study, in high school. So that's really what we're talking about. This was when, this new fancy fangled thing called broadband had just come about, and this is what the network looked like. Now, some of you guys in the room may remember this, and if you don't, it's cool. You'll notice that security was not a high concern. This is like, my desktop, my other roommate's desktop, and the third roommate's desktop, and we're all sending our traffic directly through his computer out to the internet. There was no encryption. That's a hub. We could see whatever all was going on. We used this to play a lot of EverQuest. For everybody in the room who doesn't remember EverQuest, that was WoW before WoW, but after bulletin board system games. So basically, what happened with this is that this was back when you got a provider, you could only connect one computer to your provider. Even though you had broadband, you still had to actually get it to connect. You had to click on an icon, get it to connect, and go through. So we spent some time, got a script, and we put everything behind one roommate's computer, and then got his computer to connect out. So he trusted us to change things on his computer. Again, security not that great. But this is how we connected 24 hours a day. This is how we played all our games. This is how we did all of our work. And time evolved. We got connected, without having to go through these crazy hoops. Providers realized that you should, have multiple computers on your home network. Now, granted, they charge us for data caps, but that's a different story. Now, I know we're all friends here. You guys have, known me for some of you for, maybe a year or two. Some of you guys may have just met me right now. So before I show you what my current network had become before I started this project, please hold all judgment. I'm a little shy about this because, it's kind of embarrassing. So this is what it was like. We won't really go into the details of all the things that are up here, like the different, I've redacted some of the information to protect my network from, the internet in the room. So, but you'll notice that, this is the thing that we tell all of our customers, especially if you guys have, customers or whatnot, or you have people that are, you hear about a breach, and you'll notice I've got my modem to my router to a switch, some things connected to the switch, and then a gigantic wireless cloud. And all of those things can really talk, and they can really, there's not really any segmentation, there's no control. The only thing that I have control over is what's coming into the network, which is what the firewall is doing on the, at the edge of the network. And it was not that powerful of a firewall. Definitely something I picked up at, Fry's when I was born. So this network began to keep me up at night because, you'd see a new data breach. You would hear about, for what I would do, I would hear something, about a configuration, or I would see, something in the news. And I would keep these rules, listening to podcasts, they didn't even have basic segmentation. They didn't have, this, they didn't have, firewall rules to prevent clients from talking to other clients, to prevent lateral movement. And so, like my brain does, it lets me go to sleep nice and happy, and at 3 o'clock in the morning it wakes up and says, you need to fix this. And then I toss and turn for about an hour, and then my alarm goes off, because that's the only time I can actually do any work is 4 o'clock in the morning. So I started to look a lot more like Charlie at the beginning, and feel a lot more like that. And so I said, all right, I've got to fix this. I'm an engineer, I can do this. So I set out to re-engineer my home. Really so that I can sleep again at night. If one thing's gonna keep me up, it's gonna be my kids, not how my network is. So this is where it is now. And it's not perfect, but it is it got me like, this is the first step. And then obviously as things evolve, I'm gonna keep changing it. So now we have an actual firewall. I went with pfSense just because it seemed the best choice for what I was doing. I actually have this little awesome device called a Protectly Vault. Great thing. If you have any questions, I didn't have anything about that in the slides, but I can talk to you about it afterwards if anybody's interested. And then I've got my little DNS server, and then I've got the first edge, which is media, which is I found out when I was talking about this last time. Media is kind of a bad name. This is not like media that I have, like all my family pictures and all that stuff. This is kind of things that deliver media to me. So it's IoT devices, it's Apple TVs, Roku's, it's things like that that are pulling things in, but I don't really trust them to be in my network. So they're right at the edge. Then I've got guests because, if you're a social person, you might have people come over, or if you have family, they're going to come over and then they're going to want your Wi-Fi password. And if your Wi-Fi password's like my old Wi-Fi password, you have to just type it in for them, but then they're now on your network. And you don't know where their computers have been. They're your family. So then I've got the people who actually live. I kind of trust them because I can spy on them more often and make sure they're doing the right things. And then up at the top, I have this private. And this is really, it's private, it's admin. It's kind of, if I want to spin up some machines or I want to have something in that area, that's where I do it. And then I have my lab. And my lab is where, we'll get to the lab. But this is a network that begins to let me sleep at night. And that's really, you want to have something that's peace of mind. But better yet, if you'll notice, even though I have a lab area for certain things, this entire network is a lab. It's teaching me you're learning firewall skills. You're learning, network segmentation, VLANs, you can kind of manipulate things. You can let things talk to other things or not talk to other things as you want to. And that's very powerful. So we're going to kind of go back through this just a little bit. Again, I said PFSense. The PFSense that I've got actually has 4 physical ports. So everything branches off of those 4 physical ports. And I've only got 3 listed up here because I'm not really using the 4th one for anything yet. I've got a couple of ideas, but I haven't really started playing around with it. And some of this, again, like I said, necessity. It was what equipment I have running, like lying around. It's kind of a Franken network. There's some physical devices for access points. There's a couple of some small things that are in there. But the firewall is kind of the gateway. So when I set up the VLANs, it's where everything comes back to. It's what holds all the rules. And I would like to move some of these things out so I don't just have everything dependent on the edge network. But as of right now, this is where I control things that go into my network and then come out of my network. And the going out is actually the part that I'm working on still, so I don't have it fully fleshed out. Because apparently IoT devices like to be difficult in what traffic they need to get back to their home bases. So then I have media. Like I said, this is the things you don't trust. So that Nest that's going to become part of the new Mirai botnet, or what's the new one called? I'm blanking on the name of it. Reaper or something like that. The one that's just kind of gathering forces but not really doing anything. But so these are the things you don't want to trust. So I mean, sure, it wants to get compromised. It wants to be part of Mirai or whatever new Internet of Things botnet it is. It's cool. It can go out and do that, and I'm not really sure how I can stop it from doing that. But it can't get back into my network and compromise other things on my network. It's just not built that way. And some of them you don't even need to talk to them directly in your network. You still bounce out to their provider and come back into your own network, which is kind of funny. And this is also things like an Apple TV, which again, you don't really want to trust that thing to be in your network all the way, but you still want to be able to use it. Or Roku, or I think Google Home devices. Smart light bulbs is another good example of things in this network. These are the least trusted things. And so that's kind of how I set this up. You move from least trusted to more trusted, at least. So again, for what I care about. This is you may look at this and go, man, I would never set up a corporate network this way. That's awesome, because neither would I. But this is how I kind of protect the things that are most important to me or most sensitive to me, which is really what we're talking about when we start segmenting. Now, we move in where we get to guest. Again, I kind of already mentioned this. The guests, these are the people that come into your house. They bring random devices into your house. And there are benefits to having them separated off. One, they can still get to the internet. They can actually, let's say that you have, as I do, you have family that comes over and they want to show you pictures from their most recent trip. So they're going to connect to, say, the Apple TV, to a Roku, to some kind of streaming service, and they can just show you pictures on their phone. That's awesome. You kind of want to be able to do that. Now I can actually set up a way where they can still do that, but they can't get back into my network. And that's great. So, and then the other thing you can do with this is, let's say you have people that come over regularly. They're not really people who live in your house, but they come over regularly enough that you want to know that they're, when they're there, you can give them DHCP reservations in their own VLAN. And then that way, if somebody actually connects to your guest network, which may not have as great of a password, because you want something that you can just tell people, you'll get an alert about these things. You can see it in the logs, like, hey, something weird connected, and you can change the passwords. Moving in, we have our residents. How many people are in a house where people live with them? Cool, a couple of you guys, that's awesome. They like to be connected to the network. I still don't understand that. I mean, that's really my network. But I have to let them do this, especially my daughter, otherwise she yells at me. And she's very persistent, as you guys saw from the initial story. So we want these people to be able to connect in. We kind of want them to have a little more access, and so we want them to be able to get to things and have a special set of rules, and that's why they're in their own group. I may end up splitting this out so that the kids have access to one thing and then the parents have access to other things, and just kind of, but right now it's just residents. And they need to be able to control certain things in the house, like, guests, they can't control my thermostats. People living in my house, they can. So then we have private. This is my admin VLAN, and this is how I can control what happens on the networks. This is where I manage all my firewall rules. And you'll notice it's kind of marked private because it's not, people don't really think about it when they don't really see it. And so, they do see the SSID, because hiding your SSID really doesn't do much for you, but it's there and it has a good password on it. And this is the reason why I say it's admin, is because it's not the one that I use every day. I'm actually in residence like everybody else, because what do we know about easy access? If you can change things on your network, then so can somebody else. So I kind of just drop out and drop into this one or plug in when I need to, and then it's over there and it's doing its own thing. So far, this hasn't been that big of a deal for me, which I think a lot of people think that would create some friction, having to disconnect and reconnect, but it's been pretty straightforward. And then we have the lab. Now, the lab is something that especially us as tinkerers, we want to be able to play around with. And so this can be just like, a single machine that's cut off from the network that you can spin up VMs in, you can test out new things, you can actually play around with like, different firewall rules and see what works. This is actually what I'm using right now to test out the Internet of Things devices. I basically assign them into this group and then I cut off all their access and I start working through to try to build a profile of different things I have in my house. So that is my network. It's kind of, and like I said, this is not really, this is my network. And I want to stress that because, you may be thinking this and going, that's not my network. And my network's completely different than this guy's, and now I don't know why I'm sitting this talk and I should be over there listening to lasers. But the reason is that it's my network. And, I want you to build a network that's your network. And I want you to have the freedom to do that. So let's look at how we're going to do that. First, we got to lay down some ground rules, because as engineers, you guys you're ready to go. I can tell that you guys are ready. I'm going to go buy equipment. I'm going to start configuring things. And then you're going to be locked out of your own network. And I've been there, and it's not fun. So ground rule number 1, always have a way in. This is the Cheshire Cat. It's one of my favorite characters in literature because he didn't play by the rules, but he always had a way in. He always had his way. Actually, it was the Queen's way, but he knew a way around the Queen's way, so there we go. He never really could lose access to things, and when you're configuring your firewall, you're configuring access to a VLAN, at some point you're going to lock yourself out, or you're going to cut off access, and you want to have another way in, even if that's a serial connection down to the lowest level of that pfSense box, just so you don't have to start over from the beginning. I didn't learn that lesson. Sometimes I'm a bit slow at learning lessons, so I write them down so you guys can not do that. And then this leads us to rule number 2. Now you've got this fancy network set up. It's got a whole bunch of settings, right? You want to have a backup. And maybe not as complicated as this backup, but you want to have a backup. And this actually covers 2 things. We want to have a backup of all of our software configurations so that we can get them back easily, or if we make a change, we can get back to a previous state. And then I did about 10 years of government contracting, and there was one thing that I picked up from those guys that was amazing, and it is 2 is 1, 1 is none. And so within reason, you want to have backups and like redundancy in your hardware. Because if something dies, like in the middle of making these slides, my firewall died, the nice pfSense, it was just one bad NIC card in it, and I had to go get another one. And so that's where that rule was born from. Make sure you have a backup. The final ground rule is, move like the turtle. Change one thing at a time, make sure that it works, so that if it doesn't, you can roll back, and you don't spend a lot of time debugging, let's say DNS, because it's always DNS. And it's also easier to isolate things for testing, which is the best thing about this, really. So now, what kind of network are we trying to build? And so, we're going to build a gigantic, really hardened on the outside, soft and squishy on the inside network, right? That's what we're going for. Okay, I can tell by the looks of a guest from the audience that is not what we're going for. We're going for something that is defensible. So we need a very defensible foundation when we start out. And I like castles because most people think of castles as being, they have the big walls, and they're really hard on the outside. But once you got into the courtyard, that was free reign of the whole place, right? It's not quite. Everything about a castle was built to keep people out, including like the way the stairs were built. It was built to give an advantage to the defenders instead of the attackers. They had, drawbridges. They have, a single entry point into them. It's multiple layers of defense. That's what we want in our home network. That's the whole reason for doing this. That's how we can sleep at night. This is what's going to get the bad guys to give up on us and go somewhere else because they're tired of like running into yet another obstacle, and they know they can just go down the street where they saw that nice little light bulb, and it was connected directly to the internet, and they can just take that over. So now that we know kind of what we want, we need to start with something. And none of you guys have seen this. This is a lovely program. Now I know I've got the guys who from the Going Commando, so I'm not quite doing text here, but I do have actually a text list of all the things on my network. So it is in a terminal somewhere. But I am using I think Dia is how you pronounce it, diagram, the little utility, and it has awesome pictures and icons such as this. But really what I'm talking about is an inventory of assets. So I just out of curiosity, does anybody know what the little hexagon things are, or want to take a guess at what the hexagons are on the screen? Because I had no idea that they actually needed a connection when I started mapping out my network. Okay, those are actually Apple Watches. They actually have a full stack and have their own IP addresses at times when they do things. So one day I'm looking at my my DHCP list, and I'm trying to map out things, and I'm writing down what I've got on my network, and I see my wife's Apple Watch, and I went, huh, that's wrong. And so then after a couple of minutes, I actually went over and shut it down and saw the thing go inactive, and I turned it back on and it came back up. And I was like, okay, well, those things are going to get put somewhere. I don't know where yet. So right now, not knowing what to do with them and not knowing if the phone needs to be able to see them, they're in with residence, which doesn't make me comfortable, even though I love my Apple Watch because I have one too. But it brings up a lot of questions. You want to know what's on your network, and you think with a home network, most of you guys can probably think in your head, okay, I've got all these devices, but are there any devices like that in your network that you don't know about? Little things that kind of pop up. Maybe somebody brings in, a new tablet or a new computer or something that they're playing around with, and it's there. And how stable is your network? Do you have a lot of people that are coming over visiting, that are coming in and out of your network that and that? So you want to start with documentation, which is the most boring thing I can say to a room full of engineers, but is the most helpful thing even when you're starting with your home network. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. So the next thing is you want to think about what's important to you. So I included this because that is 29 locks on the two French doors. It looks awesome. I'm not really sure how secure it is, but it looks awesome. So what's important to you? What are the critical systems and information that you have in your home network? This is something we tell to customers all the time. Not me, they don't let me talk to customers, but people who do talk to customers, this is what they tell them. I told you guys I'm a programmer. They let me out for this, and then they put me back in my little room, and that's it. So when you're dealing with critical information, for you it may be like your entire, all the photos that you take. It may be, videos. It could be documents. It could be anything. But you want to put those somewhere where only the people who need access can have access, and you don't want them accessible by things that don't need it. This is how you get a good night's sleep. Your information is somewhere where it's, buried in a concrete box. It's underneath, barbed wire and whatnot. And that's what you want. And finally, like I said before, you got to do the paperwork. It's unfortunate. We can never escape paperwork. There's always paperwork, even in your home network nowadays. So let's say that we have that. We have our network diagrams. We have our spreadsheets. We've got all the things that we need. Now we get into the actual meat of the work. And I know it's taken us a while to get here, but this is what I'm saying. We've got to lay a good foundation. The foundation actually starts with the paperwork. It starts with knowing what's on your network and getting over those little surprises. So this is, I'm from Atlanta. This is 7585 downtown connector. I know some people are probably familiar with this. You probably sat on that road going, why are we not moving? So you got to think about traffic flow, because after you get done with what's important in your network, you want to make sure that you know how the traffic's going to get to it or be blocked from it. So that's talking about physical and virtual network segmentation. We're talking about, setting up firewall rules. We're talking about setting up control points, something as simple as like DNS, making sure that DNS requests can only go to one machine. It's all the things that we think of as being good practices. So I keep coming back to DNS, and it's because every time I've had a network problem, it's been DNS. I have a love-hate relationship with DNS. I think we could just memorize numbers. It would be a lot easier. Some of you guys agree with me. That's awesome. But so, like I said before, it's DNS. It's always DNS. I thought DNS was simple, and then I met somebody who was an expert in DNS, and now I know why it's always DNS. It's a miracle that the network works. So what I have is actually this little Raspberry Pi. It's running Pi-hole, but great. I actually like Pi-hole quite a bit. It simplifies a lot of things. When you're dealing with your home network, you want things to be simple because you don't want to create a second job for yourself. We already have awesome jobs. We don't want to do that when we get home. So you want something that works once you set it up. You want something that you can play around with that doesn't burn you out. So this is kind of the firewall, or sorry, this is not firewalls. This is actually how I have my VLAN set up right now, and you'll see there's a lot of stuff in here. A lot of this kind of maps directly to what you saw before in the diagrams. It's really kind of the beginning. These are all different subnets on the network. They are all the beginning of the VLANs. DNS, we need DNS access to all of these. So this kind of starts beginning, how are we going to control the traffic? How are we going to allow it to go to the VLANs themselves, or get to the DNS server itself, but not allow other things on those VLANs to talk out to just some random DNS server that they may want to talk to. And so these are my firewall rules. This is actually pfSense. And so in here, in this, granted, I keep thinking about how I can make these better, and there's probably 100 different ways, but for right now, this is what it is. And let's see if I can actually see real quick. Okay, so at the very top, you'll see right here, I've got the Pi-hole, and I'm allowing it, and then I block everything else. One of the also interesting things I mentioned, lateral movement. Down here at the bottom, I've got where I allow for the media address. allow it to talk to that, and then don't allow anything in media to talk to anything else in media. And that's actually how I'm keeping things from talking to each other, so preventing a good bit of lateral movement. Or at least making it more difficult. I know there's like VLAN hopping. I'm starting to look through ways to kind of prevent all that stuff, or at least to combat it. And then you'll notice everything else. Like you've got access to DNS, and then we're blocking everything else. And then we're allowing it to get to the gateway, and then we're blocking all the clients. And then there's a rule down at the bottom for allow all, which honestly, when I did a screenshot of this, I forgot that I hadn't taken that out because it really, I don't think needs to be in there, or it doesn't need to be as open as that is. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about being able to control the flow, and you guys can see this. This is controlling what comes into this VLAN and actually what's allowed out of the VLAN. So nothing can get in unless it's accessed, or at least it starts from inside the VLAN to go back out. And this is kind of the basis for how I built most of the things. So if you guys can imagine, you go down to guests and residents, they can actually get into media if they initiate the conversation, but nothing from media can get in. Residents can't talk to guests can't talk to residents. It's basically just knowing what the flow is. And so this is what I'm saying, at least for media, I want to kind of separate it out, and why I'm building those egress rules for IoT. Because when I first set this up, I said, all right, what do we need to talk to? 443, 80, 22 for SSH in case I need to SSH or something? You would not believe how fast the network went down. Like Nest thermostat stopped working, all kinds of stuff just went wrong, and then I got asked why I'd broken the network again. That time it wasn't by the 5-year-old, that was my wife. She started watching a TV show, and then I killed everything. So from here, we've kind of talked a little bit, this is kind of the basics. What I realized, I got to the end, right? And I say the end. We know it's never the end. There's always going to be something new. And so back to overkilling things. I've got this, all these rules. I'm building out the rest of the egress filters. But at the end of the day, is that network any more secure than the original network I had? And I'll leave that up to you guys. I definitely want to hear what you think. Anybody? No? Okay. All right.
Good step forward.
Huh?
It's a good step forward.
It is a good step forward. It is. It's definitely, there's an improvement. There's some improvements. But in my mind, when I got to this point, I realized it may not be any more secure. So, yeah, go ahead, sir. Yeah.
One question for you.
Yeah.
On the wireless APs, do you have client isolation enabled on that?
Yes, I do. I actually am lucky enough that most of the, all the APs I'm using do allow that. I have it all turned on by default. So I may not need that rule, but some of the mixed wired and unwired networks. So it's basically, sorry, I forgot to read the question. The question is, do I have client isolation turned on the APs? And I do, which is definitely a good thing to have. If you don't have that, see if you can get it turned on. Because it saves a lot of effort when setting up things, and definitely protects you a good bit. Question? Or just, okay. So the reason why I don't think that this network is at least much more secure than the original one is I don't have an easy way to tell what's happening in the network. I don't have really any visibility. So I've done all this work, I've got all these rules, I do know where traffic's going in theory, but we all know about like VLAN hopping. There are ways around the controls that I've got in place, especially some of the virtual stuff. And given that I'm still using somewhat consumer grade equipment, I don't have some of the protections that enterprise level equipment would bring in, some of the smart switch technology, things like that. And so this kind of led me to, okay, how can I take what I think is the beginning of an overly complicated network and turn it up to 11? That's what we're in this for. We got to turn everything up to 11. And so I'm thinking about doing something. Actually, this has changed a bit after talking to you yesterday. I was looking at basically trying to get the security engine set up and start pulling in centralized logs and doing packet captures and then starting to get like events. And I work for Cisco. I work on a product called StealthWatch. So heck, let's start consuming NetFlow and see what we can do with that. See what we can get out of my network. See if I can get any kind of interesting things out of my network. And then so that's where I want to go with this. But you have now convinced me to go with Graylog. I did some reading last night, and so I think I'm going to use that for at least the centralized logging part, because that's pretty cool. So as you can see, I've done all this work, I've done a lot of stuff, and I am more than happy to answer any questions if I've gone through this or I've kind of rambled on a bit. But there's never a point where you're done, and I think that's the important part. And so you may be thinking, okay, man, this guy did all of this stuff. He's built out this kind of crazy network. And I don't even know where to begin. Well, that's the easy part, actually. Just if you saw something that kind of looked cool, like, hey, I've never played around with VLANs, just go in and find the piece of equipment that you need or the software that you need, and kind of set it up, even if it's virtually. play around with the technology. A lot of this stuff I actually broke many times while working on it. I will recommend, these books helped a lot. I have a background mainly in Linux, and the Linux firewalls was a great one, just kind of understanding how Linux firewalls work. The book of PF is actually a little bit different in the way that the PF rules, BSD, that packet filter actually works and how the rules are based. And then this is just a great book, which is kind of what I'm getting into now, which is the actual network security monitoring stuff. How to actually, yes sir.
One thing I encountered recently is that, as I mentioned at the start, that I recently partitioned my home network because I added a couple of Wi-Fi light switches, and I'm using an older Cisco router, and I initially had DDWRT installed on it, and I discovered that when I set up the virtual LAN, every time I log into the virtual network, it would blow me away with incorrect password, and even though I was entering the correct password, and I finally had to go over to alternate firmware Tomato. So just because one particular build doesn't work, sometimes I'm looking for an alternative.
Yeah, and that's I actually have one access point. It was a TP-Link access point, and I've got, I think, either Tomato or Open WRT on it. I have to go back and look because I played around with a couple. But yeah, if you run into something where you try to put new firmware on something, you try to get more functionality out of existing equipment, definitely try alternatives. That's a good thing. That's half the reason why I went with PF since the beginning, is because I just knew I had a piece of hardware that I knew was going to work on, and I threw it on there, and that kind of, at least I know I've got this base, and then if I need to expand from there, it's easy enough to like segment off from that one point, and now I can move it out. I will say that I do appreciate you guys coming by. If there are any questions, I'm here. We got plenty of time. If you don't want to ask them out loud or you don't think about them, this is how you can get in touch with me. I'm responsive through all of these. And like I said, I did make a promise that as soon as I get some of the profiling up for the IoT devices for both ingress and egress that they need, I'll post those. Probably you'll see it through my Twitter feed. I don't actually have a place to host them yet, which is why the slides are not up. But yeah, as soon as I can figure that part out, which should be easy enough, I hope. Worst case, I'll just throw it up into a random web page. Put it on Pastebin. Everything's on Pastebin. You guys will find it. But yeah, so definitely thank you for coming, and I'll be quiet now if there are any questions. Yes.
Part of the question, I think we have the same little hardware device. I purchased actually two of them because I wanted to do high availability.
Yeah.
Found I really couldn't do it at home because I didn't have to get aggressive or some of the setup doesn't work right. But the snort plugin for PFSense, all the rules enabled. I had that going over to OSIM, which is Alien Pro. It's kind of like the one you mentioned.
Greylog or Open Security Onion, sorry.
Yeah, like Security Onion. But that was pretty cool because I can see everything that's happening on my network, but the rules enabled clear text passwords, for example, things on the HTTP stuff.
Yeah.
And all my IoT devices that are on the server VLAN, they're always coming home to whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. They're definitely talking to somebody. I know some of my stuff is talking, to things that I still haven't quite identified, and for some reason at least the echo keeps communicating out over one random port that I haven't been able to pin down. I mean, it pops up and it seems to be at least what I'm seeing is ephemeral, and I haven't been able to look at it long enough to find where it's going or had something attached to it yet long enough to find where it's going. But yeah, so definitely doing something. And that's actually particularly the Vault piece of equipment. Like I said, I had everything plugged in, and then I spent about 8 hours debugging what was a hardware port. But I will say that the guys who build that equipment replaced it really quick, no question. So that was I'm definitely not knocking them. We all have things that failed, but they did a really good job. So I do not get paid to say that. That is just equipment that I use. But yeah, so it's actually that's awesome. And it's like I said, I get more ideas when I talk to people about this, and I kind of talk about the network, and I find new things to do. So. But anyway, I appreciate you guys staying. If you think of anything, come find me. I'll definitely be around, and thanks for listening.